Okay, welcome to a Spy Cops Info podcast video thing with loads of guests. We're going to do, previously I used to do like a daily recap of each day of hearings at the undercover policing inquiry. Stopped doing that, so this is the weekly recap, which hopefully will, go some way to fill that nightly spaces gap in your life. So we've just started the first week of tranche 3, phase 2. This week we had 4 witnesses: Joe Batty, who gave evidence on Monday; Monica, who gave evidence on Tuesday; Roger Geffen and GRD, who both gave evidence on Wednesday. We're going with all the guests. We're going to chat through what was said and what we make of it. So I'll just get people to introduce themselves, starting with alongside me in person is Donald Driscoll
from the Undercover Research Group.
And do you want to introduce yourselves, Emily?
Yeah, I'm Emily, co-participant, and currently campaign against arms trades media coordinator.
And Emily will be giving evidence in a few weeks' time. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, at the end of March.
Great, Roger.
Yes, Roger Geffen, as you said, I gave evidence on Wednesday morning.
Kate?
Kate Wilson from Police Spies Out of Lives and the campaign opposing police surveillance.
And co-participant.
Also a co-participant. I did
author of Disclosure, available in all good bookshops and some bad ones as well.
Thank you, Tom.
Carolyn?
I'm Carolyn. I was part of Reclaim the Streets and the November 11 Link Road campaign, which we heard about this week, and in various anti-roads campaigns and Earth First, and I'm a co-participant.
And Jay?
I'm Jay Jordan. I'm a CP, and like Carolyn, Earth First, Reclaim the Streets, but then Climate Camp and Clown Army. Those all have had spies in them.
And we should say that Emily, Roger, Jay, Carolyn, and myself are all part of the Reclaim the Streets group of core participants who produced that witness statement, which was introduced at the start of Roger's evidence, and a lot of which is going to be coming up in the next, when Boyling gives evidence next week.
Yes. Yeah, so next week we've got Jim Boyling, the undercover police officer HN14, who used the cover name Jim Sutton, infiltrating animal rights groups before getting into Hunsab groups before getting into Reclaim the Streets and other environmental organizations. He'll be giving evidence over 4 days, Monday to Thursday. If you're able to attend, please do. 3 of the witnesses this week were relating to his deployment, but the week started with Joe Batty, who was spied on by the undercover police officer Carlo Soracchi, who used the cover name Carlo Neri, particularly with his involvement in No Platform, the anti-fascist group. The evidence on Monday, the question on Monday kind of started off going through the activities of No Platform. Joe Batty described them as more of a rolling mall than a membership organization, which for a rugby fan as myself was a great line. He went through, kind of a lot of the activities of the Away Team, which is the Socialist Party's stewarding group against deployed against fascists, as well as No Platform, the explicitly anti-fascist network. He was asked about his stewarding of various demonstrations. He was very clear to kind of point out that that No Platform wasn't some sort of underground organization like the Bader-Meinhof gang. That as an organization they never targeted right-wingers in their homes, which was once again, like as we've seen throughout, like the questioning at the inquiry, there was a lot of obsession with violence and like the level to which organizations use violence. Did the rest of you follow Joe Batty's evidence?
I wasn't able to follow it on Monday. I've kind of followed some of the stuff that came up around it, and I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about Carlo Soracchi's deployment. Carlo Soracchi himself will be giving evidence coming up, and there's a number of other civilian witnesses. Joe Batty kind of appeared slightly out of sequence in the witness thing, and I think some of the issues that the inquiry is particularly interested in. I mean, first of all, Soracchi had a bunch of relationships while he was undercover, and there's, I think, 2 women appearing who he deceived.
He deceived 3 women, Lindsay, who will be giving evidence, and Don McLean. Joe Batty knew both of them, was friends with both. He talked actually about how a lot of the conversations he had with Carlo Soracchi as they spent time in Ironmonger's Row steam baths on a Saturday morning were related to the way he felt that Carlo's treatment of Lindsay as a partner left a fair bit to be desired, shall we say. He talked about the night that on New Year's Eve where Carlo Soracchi had proposed to Donna McLean, which he essentially appeared to use as a cover for the same night he incited members of the group to go round to a nearby charity shop, which he claimed was owned by an Italian fascist, to attack the premises. Nobody did actually attack the premises, though Joe Batty was quite candid. He said he went out there and drunkenly banged on the windows, which made everybody decide that throwing a brick through the window was a bad idea. That was something which had been floated in the air, allegedly. And it was this night, we've heard about it already a few times from some of the previous witnesses, particularly Dan Gilman, who gave evidence during phase 1 of tranche 3 about, what this incitement by Soracchi. And I think that questioning is going to, around that particular evening and this particular piece of agent provocateur activity, is going to be a real central point of what he's questioned about. Does somebody want to comment on that particular bit?
Yeah, it's worth seeing Joe Batty's evidence in, like to say, previous ones in tranche in phase 1, such as Dan Gilman. There's a whole series of undercovers from Pete Francis who were basically targeting anti-fascists. And Joe Batty, like a lot of the ones who gave statements in the previous one, were talking about just how much violence there was from the right wing, and basically the police weren't interested in that. And they were very much saw themselves as, we're here to defend our communities and our people.
I mean, he did contrast very well, I thought, the levels of repressive policing that anti-fascists got for, say, opposing the Red, White and Blue Festival in 2007 in Welshpool, and how the policing of that compared to what the far right was up to at the time, which nail bombings, like conspiracy to murder, some very, very serious violence coming out of the far right, and an obsession by the police against anti-fascists.
Basically, spent all the time down the pub.
Yeah, an incredibly large amount of drinking. I mean, actually, not just the pub, but also a lot of homemade booze, by the sound of it.
Yes, and absinthe, and
grappa, and I mean, Joe Batty was really really candid about that. There was some of the reports by Carlo Soracchi said, after a night of a few quiet pints, and he was like, a few quiet pints, we were doing shots of absinthe. It's like, it was very, very,
And I think this is going to come out a lot more in the reporting in this phase. And the next stuff is just how much their reporting was. We've gone to the pub. This is what we can remember. The facts are slightly skewed, but take them as written. Have a reliable source at the top of every report, and don't say that we just got 20 quid expenses for a piss up.
I mean, there were some particularly disturbing things that we heard a lot of information about the attack by the National Front against an Irish community meeting in the Cock Tavern, where anti-fascists managed to disrupt the fascist demonstration, and then we got arrested. The details that they gave then ended up in the Flag publication, which was the National Front journal of the time. And this isn't the first time we've heard of collusion between the police and the far right. We heard very similar stories from Mark Metcalf, with his details, that his incorrect details the police had taken for him, that ended up in the Combat 18 publication.
And we'll see this in Boiling, with people's details ending up in the front page of the newspaper.
I think that it's that sort of that communication between the police and the media, which, you know, planting stories, which we've heard a fair bit about already, but there's a lot more to come from that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's going to be quite a big theme, I think, in this tranche. Although it's always hard to tell which areas the inquiry is going to focus on, but certainly in the evidence that is being submitted to this tranche by civilian witnesses, there's a lot of this correlation between information that only the police have or information. I mean, it's particularly stark when you get these errors in police reporting, which are then transposed, and it's like, well, you know, that was a mistake, that wasn't true, and if that is being transposed into the media reporting, then it's because they've got it from the police who had the incorrect information.
Yeah.
Listening to Joe Batty, like many of the other civilian witnesses we've heard from, always reminds me of the value of having our voices heard by this inquiry, because we're able to explain things to Mitting and his legal team that they otherwise would not understand at all, because they have no lived experience of these sort of situations. So, for example, I think Joe Batty was talking about how in one of the spy cops reports there was an allegation about them basically going off chasing after fascists at the end of a demo, and he had to explain, look, we were there as stewards. Everybody knows, everyone who goes to demonstrations knows that the end of the demo is the dangerous time. If you're a steward and your job is to keep the demonstrators safe, that's exactly when you're going to be looking after them and staying with the crowd. You're not going to be running off on some wild goose chase. That's, you know, your job is to look after the people at that demo. And I'm assuming that Mitting has never been on a demonstration. I'm assuming a lot of the lawyers and the inquiry have not been at demonstrations. If we weren't there to explain this stuff to them, there's a real danger they would take the spy cops reports at face value and assume that that flawed version of events was true.
And I
think a really powerful moment. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, like, yeah.
A really powerful moment in Joe Batty's evidence about that was at Welling, where he was part of a stewards group for a bunch of students that come up from Kent, and they weren't involved at the front where the police were fighting, but the sheer weight of numbers because of the police charge pushed his group so hard against the church wall that they actually collapsed the wall. You know, it's that sort of really, you know, this is the impact of a police charge. It's basically crushing students to the point where our church wall falls down. So,
what were you saying, Emily?
Oh, yes. No, it was that point about sort of violence and how sort of Mitting sort of views us, and this sort of desire of the SDS to paint everyone as violent, that conveniently forgets that we have the right to self-defense, and that when our communities and ourselves are under attack, we have the right to use reasonable force to fight that, and that is lawful, like morally, legally, in terms of everything. And it's so important that we get the voice to say that. And we know that the police aren't going to protect us or our communities, and we're not looking to them to protect us. But we've seen with this inquiry, the collusion, we've seen how little they've targeted the far right. And again, with so many issues that this inquiry is bringing up, I think it's really important to bring them back to the present day, because we're still seeing those same issues in policing today. At the moment, we've got an incredibly repressive policing operation going on against anti-fascists. We've seen the violence that the far right are committing on the streets, but yet again, it's the anti-fascists that are being targeted, and those same narratives are still being perpetrated by the cops. And this hasn't gone away because it's around this issue of political policing. It's so important that we keep that at the fore of what we're thinking about as well.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely key. And I mean, I think that's really, like, we can't like emphasize enough that, you know, self-defense is no offense, and like self-defense against fascism, sometimes, you know, you've got to get your first tackle in early, even if it's late. You know what I mean? But yeah, we heard a lot of stuff about the foreign travel that Carlo Soracchi got involved in, you know, like managing, once again, like so many of the undercover cops, to get the state to pay for him to go on holiday to Italy, where he had family, on to various events. And it would appear like fabricating people traveling with him, activists traveling with him, which in Joe Batty's case, he said, no, I never went to Geneva with him. despite the fact there's reports saying that he did. Once again, things which the inquiry would believe to be the case, because they don't seem to be checking up on, like referencing evidence for any of the things that are in the reports, taking them at face value.
And this is going to. Sorry, just to say that the Genoa thing particularly is going to be important, because there's Soracchi went to Genoa, and he was actually there. He witnessed the Italian police attack on the Diaz school.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes, and there's a big question because the British government actually made a statement very shortly after that, supporting the Italian police. Along the lines of they had a difficult job to do, and I'm sure that they executed it well. And obviously, eventually, after years of legal battles, it came out like that it was an absolute atrocity what happened there, and there's a big question mark over the extent to which Soracchi's intelligence fed into that response from, I don't know if it was the Home Secretary or the Foreign Office in the UK, but the extent to which the political policing by Special Branch was actually feeding into kind of higher level political statements at an international level like that. So the presence, I mean, Soracchi wasn't the only UK undercover cop who was in Genoa. Rod Richardson was also there, and I think Simon Wellings may have gone as well.
And Mike Hogbin, Mike
Go on,
Hogbin, the corporate spy, was also there.
Oh, really? No.
Right. And Amnesty International said it was the biggest human rights violation since the Second World War at the time in Europe. Yeah. And I was there too. I was in the school.
Oh gosh.
All right.
With my son, but that's a long story.
Yeah, heavy. One of the things that also came out of Joe Batty's questioning was around as so many of the undercover officers, as part of his exfiltration strategy, Carlo Soracchi fabricated a story of something essentially to kind of get people to confide in people, something that he told them to be secret about, so that when he left, when people asked what happened to him, he was like, "Oh, there's problems." He had problems. He claimed that on news of his mother's death, which apparently has turned out to be true, his mother actually did die at this juncture, that his sister confided in him that she had been sexually abused by their father. A really significant and incredibly horrific thing, if true, which obviously isn't true. Something which Joe Batty spent many hours counselling the man he believed to be his friend about. It appears to have just been part of this use of trauma, this use of horrific and emotionally damaging things in order to act as a cover for his exfiltration. A really disturbing detail. I mean, we've heard a lot of these kind of these bullshit stories that have come from the undercover cops of a traumatic experience which they've used as part of their exfiltration. I think this is probably the worst one I've heard so far. I mean, I used to say this is the worst one, but you can't say that anymore, because I'm sure the next one we hear will be worse. Do you know what I mean? It's so disturbing.
Each time they've got to up it just that one notch more of vileness.
Yeah, and you can imagine the cops themselves, kind of behind the scenes, talking about it and going, "Oh well, I've told him this. Oh well, I mean, it's so incredibly gross." I think Joe Batty was a really good witness. I think because he's a freeman of the City of London, he was a very successful homeless outreach worker for many years. He got a lot of respect from the chair. I'm not sure I've seen John Mitting be so enamoured with a witness for quite some time. He was very, very attentive to things Joe Batty had to say.
I think partly because Joe had worked in that area where he crossed over with the police quite a bit.
Yes.
He talked about MAPA meetings and stuff, safeguarding, so somebody who was working in the system with a genuine reason for being there. It wasn't just hey, this looks like a nice job. He's out. Came across as somebody who really was there for the people he was looking after on the streets.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, it also helped that Joe is an incredibly articulate he did say in the pub afterwards, I did think of apologizing for being so verbose, but I thought everybody take the mick out of me afterwards if I did. But I mean, he was There was a lot of very long words which Mitzi appreciated in his answers. Does anybody else have anything to add about Monday's evidence with Joe Batty? So Tuesday we heard from Monica. Monica, not her real name, was a Reclaim the Streets activist who was targeted into an intimate relationship by the undercover officer Jim Boyling. We started off the day with a reporting restriction order being put in place for some background from Monica about her personal life, which explains, I think, quite. I mean, what part of the reason why she was so traumatized. I mean, we can't go into the details of it, but I think it's very. It needs to be stressed the way in which the undercover officer targeted somebody who was vulnerable in a certain way and played on those vulnerabilities in order to manipulate. Yeah, I mean, did other people follow the evidence of Monica?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, she was active with Reclaim the Streets. She explained that she was much more of a foot soldier, as she put it, in Reclaim the Streets actions, though she was an organizer in some cases. But there was a lot of questions asked of her of particular events around the organizing, which Boyling had put in his reports. She was like, I just wouldn't know. I was just turning up on the day for these sort of things. But she was active in Reclaim the Streets. I would say the most sort of like remarkable and like memorable part of the day was an accident by the deputy counsel to the inquiry who was doing the questionings, Sarah Hemingway, where she put up a report, the wrong report, as often is the case at the inquiry. This was the report about the March for Social Justice from 1997, which was the Liverpool Dockers Reclaim the Streets action, and it was the plan of what was meant to happen that day, which didn't go ahead. Perhaps somebody else. Well, let's go through the story and perhaps explain the detail of it. But it didn't go ahead, and there was instead a street party in Trafalgar Square, and it was that night when Monica was embarked on an intimate relationship with Jim Boyling. Now, I think it's really significant to say that this report like kind of sets the scene for what happened that evening. The inquiry had this document. They disclosed it to a number of other people. They had not disclosed it to Monica. Her first time seeing this report was during the questioning. She asked for it to be left on screen because it was just going to be taken down because it was the wrong one to put up. And she gave a really very powerful emotional response to what we lost. I mean, what we lost that day, but also she kind of connected it, I think, very articulately to what we've lost over the last 30 years, 30 years with the triumph of neoliberalism and what our movement could have been able to achieve if it hadn't been subject to the repression of the likes of the undercover officers. I mean, it was other people who saw that incredibly powerful.
Yes,
Yeah.
so it's important just to say, as part of the narrative, before we kind of comment on her response, you said that it didn't go ahead. I think it's really important to say it was thwarted on the basis of the intelligence that Boyling had provided, and that the police had chosen to thwart that plan. They had obviously had an internal debate, and I was able to bring this up the following day. They'd obviously had an internal debate where they could have allowed it to go ahead, the alternative plan, which was to go to the empty former building of the Department of Environment, and they contemplated allowing it to go ahead, and they chose not to. They chose to divert us into our plan B, which was to end up with a street party in Trafalgar Square, despite their own intelligence saying there was a greater likelihood of disorder. So that's, I think, important context for Monica's reaction to learning about the plan that Jim Boyling had foiled on the day that their relationship started. I think that's important context.
Yeah.
Also, just
quickly, Roger, your sound is getting a little bit of feedback. I don't know if there's any way you could alter that at all.
It's saturating. It's distorting a bit. I don't know if you can turn the mic volume down a bit.
Sorry, Carolyn.
Yes, I think you mentioned something about it being an accident that this came up on screen. I mean, it's not an accident on the part of the inquiry that Monica hadn't had this disclosure. It was a deliberate choice on their part not to share the same disclosure with us that the rest of RTS core participants got. And that's because either they're incompetent or they're stupid. But one of the two, like she has said very clearly in her witness statement that she was involved and part of Reclaim the Streets, just like all of the rest of us who contributed towards the Reclaim the Streets joint statement. We were all given disclosure as a group, but that wasn't the stuff that was shared with us was not shared with Monica. And that wasn't the first time in the hearing when she said, hang on, I haven't seen this document before. There was an earlier one to do with an action at Pinkerton's, the security guards that had been doing work for the Newbury bypass, where it mentioned Road Alert. And she said, hang on, I haven't seen this before. And then there's another one that mentioned Liverpool Dockers, also mentioned Advanced Party, Freedom Network, and a bunch of other groups. And she hadn't seen that before.
It happened to Joe Batty as well.
Yeah.
So it's happened
this isn't accidental. Yeah. And it's a massive problem because even those of us who've had some disclosure to do with Reclaim the Streets know that we haven't seen everything either. And although in some cases it seems that we've been only disclosed things because it's got our individual names on, there's other situations and other documents that we know of now that have got our names on that were not shown to us as well. So it's a bit of a mess. And it's because this inquiry is not doing its job very well. I'm sure everyone else has got stuff to say about this.
Okay.
I mean, I think there's so much to say about this document and about this incident. I mean, first of all, as Carolyn said, we had, as Reclaim the Streets, seen that document and other documents around the events of the March for Social Justice. And I think the political significance of the way that policed is really big. I mean, the March for Social Justice and the joining up between Reclaim the Streets and the Liverpool Dockers strike was an incredibly significant political moment in the sense that it was kind of green and red. It was the environmentalists and the workers' struggle coming together.
And black.
Green, red, and black. Yes.
Don't remember the black.
Don't forget the anarchists. But you know, in terms of the state's reaction to it, the plan that was on that document that Monica saw and her reaction to it, I was so moved by her reaction to it because it was just so genuine. And she read the plan and she was angry. She was viscerally angry because she said, look at that, read that. That is beautiful and that should have happened. And they sent undercover police and they chose to stop it. And the plan was to take the demonstration to an empty building, occupy the building and hold several days, I think 2 or 3 days of workshops and discussions about this coming together of environmentalists and anarchists and workers' struggles. And the police essentially decided on that day that they would rather have a riot with all of the negative press coverage and fear and traumatization that creates than have that political coming together of movements over a couple of days. So, and I think it really exposes the political nature of this. It was not, not only was it not about stopping disorder, but actually given the choice between a political space of discussion and people mobilizing and organizing or a riot, the police chose a riot. That's what intelligence shows.
And it comes down all the time to the state. When we start to provide some kind of glimpse of a kind of prefigurative, some kind of alternatives to and the whole idea was it was providing alternatives. It was on the eve of the general election. It was pretty clear that Tony Blair was going to win, that the Labour Party was going to come in, and they were going to become a massively neoliberal Labour Party. I mean, look what's happened. And so it was all the social justice movements and the ecological movements and the direct action movements. And it's also in the wake of the criminal justice bill. So you've got the kind of party crowd. So it's a real composition, a really super interesting composition. And so, as you were saying, it was a super dangerous moment. But what's also dangerous is that, we have to be seen as the kind of demon violent anarchists who have no proposition, or communists or ecologists. And they also, so that also means breaking the communication. So basically the night before, Roger, me and someone else, we had spent weeks and weeks and weeks producing a kind of spoof newspaper, which was a spoof Evening Standard that looked exactly like the Evening Standard, was printed on newsprint. And we did, I think, 20,000 copies. And the front page said general election cancelled. And then all the inside was basically some of the content of what would have been discussed and debated and shown in what I think we were going to call the real Department of Environment, which was the squatted building. And so they came and they arrested us as soon as we got out of the van and started piling out the newspapers out of the van, and took away 20,000 newspapers, which were going to be the night before distributed to all the commuters. And so, people would see what we were about. And of course, they never saw that. I mean, we did, luckily, I had 3 left in my bag, and we also had a copy, obviously, and somehow magically someone just handed me in the squat that night, another building we squatted, handed me a bunch of cash and said, do it again. So we did republish it, but it was too late by that time. And so, and interestingly, Boyling hired the sound system van when Monica came into the space of Trafalgar Square, which we mustn't forget is the home ground for the Metropolitan Police. They've been basically creating riots and in that space since the middle of the 19th century. They know it like the back of their hand. That's why no one should ever do anything there. She met him there, and he was worried about getting the van out because the van was hired by him. What is interesting is the van then went out that night, and the headlines were activists on I can't remember the exact wording, but it was basically attempted murder charges. So the headlines in the evening paper that night was attempted murder charges because the van had gone through a police line. What Jim's role in that, we don't really know, but in terms of a kind of them taking control of the storytelling. And that's what the British police are really fucking good at. They're much better than the French police. I live in France. They just do pure violence. The English police have learnt their Foucault. They know that actually you stop social movements through fucking with people's heads and storytelling and press and infiltration and trust. And it's a psychological battle and a legal battle, not a street battle. Well,
we should be clear with...
Sorry, go on.
I was thinking we should be clear with people just so it's clear what the plan was, and the extra beauty of it was the building that was going to be squatted or occupied for the weekend was the former offices of the Department of the Environment, which had been vacated, was sitting there empty, a prime target for squatters, but especially for this and especially for RTS to say, look, we've got an alternative, and we're the alternative Department of the Environment.
And I think this is part of the.
I'll go. Can I just, for the record, Jay talked about Jay, myself, and another person. It came across as if we'd been the people who worked for weeks on the paper. I hadn't. It was the 3 of us who were then arrested at the point when we were about to start distributing that paper, just to kind of clarify what may have come across unclearly. And we should, and it's also worth saying, perhaps at this point, that we were subsequently able to claim wrongful arrest compensation of about £6,000 each, because they knew perfectly well that we were not about to incite a fray or whatever it was that was charged. They were just doing it in order to nick this piece of glorious agitprop that Jay and others had created. We were actually bailed to return the following day in other words, on the day that the March for Social Justice actually took place. They said that they were going to interview the three of us. They then kept us all day waiting for this person who was supposed to interview us to turn up, only actually interviewed us and released us from that police station after Trafalgar Square had been cordoned off. We now know from Boyling's evidence that he was aggrieved that as he himself said, the wrong people had been arrested, and therefore gained this £6,000 wrongful arrest compensation each. What's not clear is how did that happen? What was this some police intelligence failure? But it is pretty clear that they only turned up and arrested the three of us in order to stop that agitprop getting out, not for any legitimate policing purpose of preventing disorder. They were preventing glorious agitprop from getting out. But sorry, that's just to put the record straight on that. It's perhaps just worth going back to Monica a bit before we jump onto our home story, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say was that I think there's these kind of themes of that are going to start coming out in this tranche of protecting the government from embarrassment, protecting corporate interests. I mean, we've heard quite a bit of that around the McLibel stuff, but they become much more significant in this tranche as the obvious kind of driving motivations behind what the SDS and the political police are doing. But kind of going back to Monica's evidence and the I mean, it was this kind of incredible mix of, on the one hand, these sort of insights into what was happening politically. And I mean, I've said this before, but for me, it was really powerful because it was the first day of evidence in this inquiry about groups and events that I was actually involved in. So having been following all this for what it's been going for over 10 years now. Like to finally start hearing evidence about stuff that I kind of lived in the flesh was really quite moving. But also on the other side of it was this, like, as Tom mentioned before, Monica was a very vulnerable person, and just this personal story about Jim Boyling. And I have to say that, you know, among a fairly large collective of individuals in a extremely toxic, misogynist and unpleasant culture that was the STS, Jim Boyling stands out as a particularly nasty and particularly misogynist character. And there is evidence to come from other women that he deceived into relationships, and it really goes deeply into the area of coercive control and abuse. And I was quite struck hearing Monica's evidence to really see evidence of that, and evidence of his nastiness, and evidence of the coercive control really quite early on in his deployment. I mean, we, as Category H, which is the women who were deceived into relationships, we have made submissions to the inquiry about the dangers of this process of putting these men undercover, giving them a mask, giving them an identity, telling them no one will ever know what they did, and also taking them away from the family and social and all the constraints that kind of keep us acting like decent people because we care what other people think about us, taking people out of that context, putting them undercover and allowing them to essentially live out their fantasies, and how that creates monsters. And I think, you know, that analysis, when you look at Jim Boyling, just how quickly and how early on those kind of tendencies start coming out. And yeah, I've lost my thread with the horror of it all, frankly, but
totally understandable.
It's so clear. I mean, also, I mean, to be honest, I was really lucky. I never built any friendships with any of the undercovers because they were all macho wankers, and I really didn't like them. And the only reason I trusted them was because they were with really cool women. you know, and so it's so obvious that they were just, you know, I mean, that it was also, you know, it was so much a kind of way of being trusted, actually, and yeah, I mean, and especially him, he was just, yeah, he was.
I mean, this I think some of the stuff that we heard in terms of the questioning really reflected that. There was a lot of questions for Monica about monogamy, whether it was a polyamorous relationship. She was asked those kind of questions quite a few times. There were claims from Jim Boyling that she was seeing other men. She was quite clear that as far as she was concerned, it was a monogamous relationship. The other men that he refers to just happened to be friends of hers, that she wasn't in any other relationships. There was a really, it was quite distasteful, really, a lot of that line of questioning that was kind of, I think she really well, like she dismissed it incredibly well. But I think that I mean, the reason it was being asked was because so much of what Boyling has said in his written statement around this relationship is to suggest that somehow there was different rules apply when it comes to having sexual relationships with people, with women in activist groups. That there's a different sort of sexual morality, and that to excuse his appalling behaviour.
Yeah, basically trying to blame us.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's the inquiry is in a slightly difficult position with this, because they are supposed to be it's supposed to be a relatively neutral process, and they are required to put questions to us that are posed by the police to some extent, in the same way that we look at the evidence and we pose questions to the officer. And CTI is to some extent required to, you know, feed those questions into the evidence hearings. And I think there's a very, very difficult line here around the way that sexual abusers defend their behavior. And I don't think the inquiry, I'm gonna be polite and say I don't think they always get it right. And you know, and I think there's a lack of sensitivity in this process to what are actually quite well understood patterns of abusive behavior and the ways that abusers re-victimize and blame the victims of that kind of sexual and emotional abuse. And I think that part of the problem here is that we've got a lot of very overworked lawyers, and we've got an old retired judge, and what we don't have is a panel of experts who really understand the complex issues that are being addressed here. And I think some of the insensitive questioning that you see in the hearings is an example of that. I think that there's an awful lot more going on. I know that there is an awful lot more going on behind the scenes in terms of how the women who were deceived and abused in these relationships are treated. That goes even further into just really just enabling the men who abused them to continue to question and undermine them in really subtle and not so subtle ways.
I think it's not just this inquiry that's a problem. It's, you know, lots of different judicial processes still haven't caught up with the way that abusive men use the legal system and these processes to continue perpetuating that sort of abuse on the women that have managed to get away from them. And you see it in family courts and other sort of courts as well. So that's the background for, you know, all of these lawyers and judges that run public inquiries as well. It's like, unless they've had some specialist training or some specialist background, and I'm pretty sure Mitting doesn't have a background in, you know, domestic violence, for example, or coercive control. It's not something he's ever had to deal with. It's no surprise.
Well, exception of dealing with MI5.
Yeah, quite.
Yeah, I mean, and Boyling also, let's not forget, it's like, is totally a Metropolitan Police officer, and the police are well known to have higher than average involvement in abusing the women that they have relationships with. Like, not just the spy cops, but just normal police officers are really well known as domestic abusers.
It was raised actually by the Deputy Counsel of the Inquiry, Sarah Hemingway, in the questioning. It was put to Monica that Boyling had said that it would have been incredibly difficult. It would be impossible for him to do his job, to infiltrate the group without being in a sexual relationship with somebody. This is something that we've heard again and again. We heard it from Mark Jenner before Christmas, who said that it wouldn't be possible to do the job without the level of sexual abuse that he perpetuated. I think Monica took a very powerful takedown of that. So it'd be a really good idea if that society decides that we really do need to infiltrate people who are trying to make the world a better place. It'd be a really good idea not to have sex with them whilst doing so. I mean, it's just as simple as that, really.
And there was this whole thing about the single men not being trusted. If you're a single man in these meetings, you're like, there were loads of fucking single men in this meeting.
Donald?
Just to go back to something you said slightly earlier, it's like the idea, it's called a public inquiry. The questioning is for one person only. It's for Mitting. All the questions are for his ears. He's somebody. He's almost 80. Doesn't have this lived experience. So this is the disconnect. We talk about public inquiry, and really it's him. It's simply for him. I think this is a fundamentally structural problem with all these processes.
I mean, just to continue on that thing of what Jim Boyling says about the relationship with Monica, he claims it was a couple of weeks. It was a casual fling, that he was one of many men that she was sleeping with. She rejects that outright. It was at least 6 months, as far as she was concerned. It was a monogamous relationship. It was very serious. He claims that that he was. She says that he was mirroring her. He claims it was mutual attraction, and I think she really powerfully kind of said, "How could it be mutual attraction? He was not who he said he was. There's no way you can't call it that." She thought it was at the time, because he presented to be somebody completely different to who he was. But the reality of the mutual attraction was just not possible. It's not possible. And it's been such a key part of the defense of these undercover officers that there was there's something mutual about these relationships. Of course, they couldn't.
Genuine feelings is a term that they use a lot. I think in terms of what you've said about the need, the impossibility of having these operations without having the relationships, that there's a very, very big question that is coming up over and over again in these in the evidence about the officers in this tranche, and it is about the role of their manager and head of the unit at the time, Bob Lambert, and the other officers like HN1, who went by the cover name of Matt Rayner, and Andy Coles, who wrote the tradecraft manual, which actually suggests that officers sleep with women if they need to, and I think it's really important to remember this, that just the way that the evidence that we've seen over the past tranches of how the rot sets in, because you get these officers who have horrifically misbehaved, and instead of being caught, instead of being disciplined, instead of being sacked for the abuses, they are commended and they are promoted and they are put into positions where they train and they mentor and they manage the officers that come after them. And it's quite clear that by this period in the tranche 3, by this tranche 3 period that we're looking at now, the general understanding within the unit was that this was how it was done. And I mean, one of the big questions for me, by the time we're talking about now, the SDS is operating, but the MPOIU has also been set up in 1998, and you have this crossover between the units, and these attitudes and this tradecraft bleeds over into the new unit, which is supposed to be governed by the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and the Human Rights Act and proper training mechanisms, and somehow there is this process by which all that rot is transmitted into the MPOIU, and we're not going to hear about that for a while. but it is the next tranche coming up of the inquiry. And I think there's a lot of things popping up in the evidence that we're seeing now that I think will be feeding into the next tranche of the inquiry with a new chair and a new police unit, but quite a lot more of the same.
Yeah.
I think there's also like something really interesting, for example, with HM3, Jason Bishop, who directly took over from Boyling and took over some of the roles that Boyling played in RTS, and he didn't have a sexual relationship, and that just blows their crass awful excuses that they needed to have these relationships to gain credibility out of the water. And I think that again is something that, you know, really needs to be drawn out, because they've just been relying on this over and over and over again, but then they deploy officers that don't. Also, just like related to that MPOU point, because for those of us in this tranche, we're dealing with an impossible situation where we haven't actually had all the disclosure from that period of time. So like for several of us here, we were being spied on by both units simultaneously, but because of the way it's divided up, like my witness statement is written just on the SDS, but I'm missing all those other officers who were also spying on me. So it's impossible to give a full account and actually answer the evidence properly because we're not getting it.
Yeah, there was a whole bunch more questions put to Monica about the relationship with Boyling. She talked about the contempt he seemed to have for her, about how antagonistic he was towards feminism. She talks about there's a lot of his reports shown where he claimed that there was like division that existed within the Reclaim the Streets group. Something we've seen throughout from undercover officers is like an attempt to like expose like divisions within the group, like looking in the intelligence reports, like showing ways in which wedges could be driven between people in order to undermine and discredit and destroy groups. Well, it's something we've seen numerous reports doing similar things. There's a lot of that in Jim Boyling's reports. And Monica was quite clear she didn't recognize it. She just didn't recognize the way it was being talked about. Though there may have been disagreements that existed, the way in which he talked about there being like this core group and this other group, she said, well, it just wasn't like that. There was a lot more nuance to it than what he sort of he made out. Well, she talked as well about, she was asked about the way the relationship between them ended. It was quite disturbing sort of selection of questions around the end of the relationship and the fact that Jim Boyling essentially emotionally manipulated her into having sex with him again. A really unpleasant thing where she talked about, well, he really wanted it, I didn't, but I did it because he wanted to, and how that made her feel. Not for the first time, it was really uncomfortable to hear the evidence in the inquiry. I mean, there are no words really to describe just how disturbing and like despicable these undercover officers behave towards women.
Yeah, and she said herself that, you know, what really stuck out for her was how many snidey comments he managed to put into the reports that she's seen. And she believed that not only did he view her with contempt, but generally saw himself as superior to everyone.
And GRD
And
said
really
that GRD said when they were having kind of matey chats together, he was really pushing the bitching about activists all the time to GRD.
And it's not just Boyling on this one. It's other undercovers you see in their report. There's a escalation of just how nasty. We're all referred to as wearies, and like now the managers are using that term, but you really see that coming up as a much stronger topic.
Yeah. There's I mean, we can't talk too much about the officers that we haven't had the evidence published yet, but it's definitely something that starts coming out more and more. The other thing that I remember from Monica's evidence was there was this like quite a lot of questioning about Jim's nicknames and the fact that he was known quite widely in the movement as Grumpy Jim, and like generally didn't, you know, that was kind of the persona that he had, and you know, it kind of, you get the sense that in a kind of larger social group that would kind of be absorbed. But then when you got into the sort of closer personal relationships that he had with Monica and the other women, that kind of nastiness became a little bit sharper and more directed. And yeah, I mean, I found it all very unpleasant. I mean, I knew Jim, and I don't kind of have those memories of him particularly, but listening to the evidence, it's like, oh, that's just really nasty. And that kind of came across over and over again.
There was also, it was interesting to see, so in a lot of the files, there's a lot of reporting on Monica. In fact, so much so that she had her own code name in the police reports, Perpetual Motion, which suggests that there was a surveillance of her that went over and above the usual level of reporting on somebody. We saw that in 1997, a registry file was opened on her. We also saw a report from 2000, a detailed report, a special branch report on her personally, that recommended a registry file be opened on her. She'd already had one for 3 years. Interestingly, by 2000, she said she'd largely withdrawn from activism. So the fact that she had a registry file by that point, there was a special report suggesting a new registry file on her, which makes no sense and just suggests that actually the internal administration within bureaucracy within the SDS was very fallible. It says a lot. There's also a 5-year review of her in 2005, which suggests that she continued to be monitored, despite the fact she was well out of activism by this point. And it really shows the way in which, once kind of like some sort of Godfather thing, you know, once there's a registry file on you, they're spying on you. When you're dead, you're out. But until then, you know, you're fair game.
I did actually think in her case, it's not just because she was an activist and they like to keep tabs and hoover up everything, but the continuing surveillance of her for so many years afterwards is because of Jim.
I'm sure.
And we've seen this in other spy cops. If they felt threatened by the possibility that someone they'd had a relationship with was going to come looking for them, they wanted to keep tabs on that person. And it's like we've seen that with other previous witnesses and many of the other women that we've heard about the stories already. And the great lengths they went to keep a track of, you know, where Helen Steele was and what she was up to is quite common knowledge now. And I really believed when I heard this from Monica that it's because Jim's asked for extra surveillance on her, or he's made damn sure that it happened because he wants to be able to go back and read those files and keep a track of what she was up to for himself.
Yeah, well,
I think when we hear if we hear from Rosa, we're going to hear even more about the lengths that he went to keep track of her after they split up.
Well, I mean, it should be pointed out, you know, that as you said, Monica was not the only woman who was deceived into a long-term intimate relationship by the undercover officer Jim Boyling. We were originally scheduled to hear from Rosa on Thursday. She withdraws from giving evidence on Thursday. We hope that she'll be back in June to give evidence. She was deceived into a much longer relationship by Jim Boyling, which resulted in the birth of 2 children. The details of which of the coercive control has been referred to by Kate earlier, but I mean, it is harrowing. I really hope people get to hear that full story, and we won't touch upon it now, but it's significant. There's also Ruth, who was another woman who was deceived into an intimate relationship by Jim Boyling. We heard she was quoted from her statement at the evidence of when Monica was being questioned, where she really took aim at this claim by Jim Boyling that he was at the heart of things. He was a central organizer. He was well connected. She says, no, she was, because he was going out with her. He had access to that network. And that really speaks to something Jay said earlier about the way in which the use of women, there's all sorts of reasons why the undercover officers use women, but not least among them is because they were activists and they had connections, and it furthered their legend, not just their legend, but their ability to be part of these networks.
But also, once they got that toehold in the thing, then how much, I think it's really strong with Boyling, how much it became a central organizer, creating the very actions that he was then reporting on. You know, like,
I mean, if we go on to talk about Roger and GRD's,
I mean, just to finish on Monica before we move on. I mean, is there anything else anybody else like to say about Monica? I think it was an incredibly powerful delivery of evidence by her. I think particularly towards the end, she laid out some of the really sort of like the visceral kind of reaction to the experience of being deceived and being used in this way, about how these undercover officers use women like dogs, that they kind of they had the treatment of them, the contempt. She wondered how the kind of way that he talked to his handler about her, about the women in general, about, you know, as Kate said earlier, you know, the depth of the misogyny, the depth of the hatred to women. Yeah, I mean, I think it was. I really recommend it. It was only an audio recording. You can't see the video, for obvious reasons. Monica has anonymity, but the audio is there. I mean, it's a very emotional testimony. I really recommend it if anybody wants to know more detail. Does anybody else want to add anything?
I think it was just a very powerful bit she said just before that at the end, when she talked about how, you know, Extinction Rebellion, for example, happened quite recently. She didn't get involved in it at all, like because of everything that happened with Reclaim the Streets and with finding out about Jim Boyling and how he deceived her. She did not feel able to get involved in activism that otherwise would have been really dear to her heart. And that, I think she described it as a collective violation. It was something that was an abusive situation that was carried out by the people in charge, the people with the power, collectively against us collectively. It also talked a lot about how utterly heartbroken she was at the state of the planet and feeling like she didn't have a voice, she wasn't being listened to, there was no way to affect any kind of change at all. And she felt that without any voice, without any power, all she could do was pick up litter and grow vegetables. And I'm sure those words resonate with plenty of people that had been really involved in activism in the past and maybe aren't so involved now. And I think we need to recognise that the Spy Cops had a huge impact on Earth First and our entire movement. And a lot of people individually, not just the women who were deceived, but a lot more of the people around them in those networks.
Yeah, that can't be underlined enough. For every one of us who is following the inquiry closely, we all represent dozens and dozens of people who are our comrades, who experienced the same things as we did, who aren't able to follow the proceedings, who have dropped out of activism, who feel so damaged by the experience that they're not able to engage in politics anymore. Sorry, Jay.
No, I was saying, and I feel that it maybe it's something that we don't talk enough about in these public spaces, but maybe I've been on the edges, so not. But I don't know. I think that deep effect on us all is something that feels to me that it hasn't enough come out, actually. But
I think part of the reason for that is that we don't want to. I think most of us don't feel comfortable with our sort of victimhood in this sort of thing, and you know, kind of, yeah, it's just it's not part of our sort of like our vocabulary when it comes to talking about these things in such a way. But I mean, it can't be stressed enough, really. And I think that it also speaks to something generally. I mean, there's so many people who engage with activism on a very short period of time, maybe just attend a certain demonstration, have a traumatic experience at the hands of the police, and don't engage again. It's a tactic the police use on purpose to alienate people from the idea of taking action.
And it's one of the things. It's one of the things that I kind of want to bring out of the inquiry is this deliberate tactic of breaking people's mental health. And it's something I've done a lot of work on sort of generally in sort of other areas of my life in policing campaigns, because when we talk about harassment policing, even like what the uniformed officers did, we're talking about a strategy of policing that is designed to break people's mental health. That is the very purpose of those policing operations. If you talk about harassment policing, what are you saying you are prepared to do to people's mental health to stop them exercising their right to protest? And we talk about parity of esteem with mental health and physical health in terms of health services. We don't apply that to policing. Like, we know the police go and beat the shit out of people. We know that's something that they do. They brutalize people. But it's not a deliberate tactic in the same way that harassment is, in the same way that deliberately breaking people's mental health is. And, you know, as someone who's had 2 breakdowns as a result of policing, I think it's so important to be talking about it in those terms, that when they use terms like harassment policing, when they say, like when the SDS say that they're targeting uniformed officers to harass people because of their intelligence, that is what they are saying, that is what they are trying to do, and that is deliberate, and that is abhorrent.
I mean, they even used the word on the lead up to May Day as a whole campaign of, and they used the word harassment. They were, using that.
It's something we'll see an awful lot more. Is this legitimate in their terms tactic of this? They call it disruption, but disruption is driving people out of the movement, basically. Disrupt, as well as destroying actions, it's also about personalized disruption of lives. And we will see stuff coming in the next branch of where that's deliberately written into the policing model.
Just quickly before we move on to the Wednesday, there are 67 people watching right now. Please like, such a cheesy bit. Please like it. Please share this broadcast if you're able to. Please subscribe to wherever you're seeing this. Follow the coverage. Hashtag SpyCops. You'll find it pretty much everywhere. If you're able to share it with friends, if you think there's anybody else who'd be interested, please share that around. It'll be great to see. We can see that 6 people have liked it so far. It'd be great to see that number go up. So on Wednesday we had 2 witnesses. Sorry?
I'm just saying, will the recording be available on YouTube, presumably for people that didn't get to see it now?
Yeah, that's always the case. Yeah, the videos once they're live, you can always watch them back. You can always watch them back.
Get on the case.
As I said at the beginning, I'll be cutting this bit out. I'll be cutting all this out. This is a podcast recording, an audio version. So if there's anything you want to say, don't use your hands because the audio is the one that I'll be distributing further and wider. But yeah, so please share if you're able to. Great, it's just 3 people have just liked based on that alone. Marvelous, thank you very much. Please, more of you do so. And there's 70 people watching now. So we've got 5 extra viewers just from me saying that. Isn't that great? Okay, so on the Wednesday we had 2 witnesses, GRD at the end of the day. But first, Roger Geffen, who is with us here today. So I mean, rather than me go through what was said, Roger, you gave evidence for just half a day, which felt like an incredibly short amount of time for the amount of detail and the impact of the infiltration on you and what you were involved with. How do you feel it went?
Well, before I go into any length, is my microphone any better? Because I went off.
It really isn't, I'm afraid. It is okay. Playing right up.
I'll make my contribution. In that case, it's probably better if I make my contribution short. If it's painful to listen to, I've been having some problems with it. It comes and goes. Sometimes it's all right. Sometimes it's not.
It's okay. I mean, you just sound a bit Darth Vader-y.
Bit Darth Vader-y. All right. How did I feel it went? I felt it went all right. It was a strange thing because I put in a personal statement as well as contributing to the joint statement from some of us involved in Reclaim the Streets. I then ended up being the only person from the sort of Reclaim the Streets informal group who got called to give oral evidence, and therefore I was. Although we didn't choose to represent Reclaim the Streets, we can't. I didn't choose to represent even our small group from people who used to be involved in Reclaim the Streets. I can't, but that's effectively what I ended up having to do. So I had this sort of, sense of responsibility, but we had some really good discussions beforehand, and I think I want to also pay tribute to the legal team who really helped me kind of just make sure I was, very focused on what I most needed to do, and I hope we did it.
Just as a suggestion, I'm not sure. There's a lot of background. Maybe is your phone close to the microphone? Maybe sometimes that does cause interference. Also, there's a lot of beeping going on in the background. If somebody's got alerts on their phone, if they could switch them off or move them away from the.
Sorry, that's me. I can't figure out how to.
I mean, if you just throw it the other side of the room or something.
No, it's the same computer that I'm working on. And if I turn the alerts off, it turns the mic off. I'll see what I can do.
Yeah, so I mean, just to say on, we'll go into the detail of it, but Roger was being questioned by Len Paulson. Apparently has appeared before during tranche 1 of the inquiry, which I was there for. I was there for every day of it. I've been there for every day of the entire inquiry. I don't remember him. I think it's fair to say he was the worst of the inquiry lawyers when it came to questioning. Incredibly rude on numerous occasions. Understandable that for the stenographers that he asked for the speech to be a bit slower. I mean, there's a common problem, nothing to really worry about. But then to constantly complain that the answers were too long, that there was too much detail, and nonsense, given that, you know, you are appearing there of your own volition, you're being asked questions, and then you're answering in a detailed manner.
Open-ended questions at that.
Very open-ended questions. Yeah.
I mean, I do remember him. He questioned the Menson family, and I remember thinking, this is a new barrister. I've not seen him, and asking who he was, and actually thinking he was rather good. And I think we have seen this before. We saw this with the questioning of Lois Austin. And I think it is basically what happens when you get barristers who are underprepared questioning witnesses who are extremely well prepared on the material that they are talking about. And we saw it with Lois, and we saw it with Roger, that the answers were, you know, maybe going to things that they'd planned to ask about later. And instead of being able to react to that and adapt their questioning, there was an irritation on the part of the barrister that, I don't want you to talk about that now. I want you to talk about it when I ask you about it. Otherwise, you're just going to throw me off. So I don't actually think it was Roger's fault. I think, and it probably, to be fair, was not the barrister's fault either, because frankly, we're all going into this extremely unprepared. We've already raised the issue of people being shown documents during their questioning that they haven't seen. There is a massive problem. Counsel to the inquiry raised it in their opening statement. There is a massive problem that the inquiry has gone ahead with these hearings without being able to have prepared the evidence. Obviously, with all the levels of secrecy and nonsense with this inquiry, it's not totally clear why they haven't prepared the evidence, but there isn't a hearing bundle. It's coming out in dribs and drabs. So it's not only that we haven't necessarily seen the evidence, but it's quite possible that counsel hadn't seen the evidence until very, very late in the day and didn't know what they were going to be asking. So I think we might be seeing a bit more of this, to be honest, of these irritable barristers, and we might have to raise it with them and say, like, you know, take a breath. We're all underprepared, and it's actually the inquiry's fault, not ours. Because yeah, I really got that impression, and I was shocked when the barrister did it with Lois, and it really felt similar, and it just felt like the barrister was underprepared for what they were doing.
That fits, because I've been asking for, you know, the witnesses are all given the opportunity to have a pre-meet with the barrister, and when I asked about it, they said, "Do you really need to meet him a day or two beforehand? Won't, you know, 9 o'clock on the morning of the inquiry do? He's still preparing." So I think that really backs up that they were struggling with the fact that my statement, the joint Reclaim the Streets sort of core participant statements were only released even to other people involved in the inquiry very late on. And of course, my statement is now up on the inquiry website, so it's there in the public domain. But the joint Reclaim the Streets statement from those of us here still is not, and will not yet be appearing until after Jim Boyling has given his evidence. It won't be appearing until next Thursday. So, but yes, I think all of this speaks to the backs up Kate's point, that CTI is that they themselves are under all the same pressures. You know, everyone's seeing documents really late in the day. Lots and lots of documents came through very late in the day, and in the run up to sort of having to go and give this evidence.
I mean,
it would all be a lot more understandable if they didn't have a budget of many, many millions.
But also, I think it's really important to say that, Roger, you were incredibly grounded and you dealt with it incredibly well. But actually, you know, if I were giving answers and the barrister basically kept interrupting me and irritably telling me that I was giving the wrong answer, I would be a basket case. You know, there would become a point where I'd just be like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm obviously getting it wrong. I don't know what you want. And so I thought you dealt with it incredibly well. I was quite shocked. And I think that in terms of taking a trauma-informed approach to the questioning, that, you know, the two times that I've seen it happen, the witnesses did deal very well with it, and you know, both yourself and Lois were incredibly well prepared and knew very well what you were talking about and what you wanted to say. But you know, it could go really badly wrong if that happened with a witness who was less emotionally prepared to deal with it.
I mean, you had the patience of Job, quite frankly, particularly when it came to the questions around violence, which by my count, there were 12 questions about violence, about the violence of Reclaim the Streets, about your violence, I suppose, which doesn't exist, but you know, the idea, I mean, one particular point was that you were asked, do you believe in the rule of law? And then there was a gotcha, but you supported people who broke the law. So therefore, I've undone you. I mean, it was just like incredibly childish, I think, as much as anything else, the way it was delivered, but also just boringly repetitive. These constant sort of insinuation that Reclaim the Streets was secretly violent, and I mean, and also there's something which, you know, reflected what was happening at the time in terms of the media coverage, in terms of the way in which the police tried to present Reclaim the Streets as if they were a violent organization or being infiltrated by those who were going to be violent. And I think you dealt with it incredibly well, but it must have been frustrating.
Well, yes, I mean, I expected that, obviously. I think when I go back to say what did I feel was the main thing I wanted to get over was the point that we touched on earlier, that the policing, you know, the ostensible reason, the stated reason for it was to prevent disorder, and yet the only disorder that ever took place in Reclaim the Streets was either initiated by the police at the end of the first two street parties at Camden and Islington in 1995, or was the police using the intelligence they gained from Boyling from 1995 onwards to create situations where disorder was more likely, not less. And we've already kind of touched on that in the case of the March for Social Justice, where they prevented us from having our workshop, 2-day weekend session of workshops and, you know, alternative Department of the Environment in the old ex-Department of Environment building. But the same happened with the Carnival Against Capitalism in 1999. So to the earlier point about what is the purpose of the policing, and Emily touched on breaking the spirits of people, and that is absolutely true, but I think it's worth highlighting several others, one of which is to stymie our ability to get our positive messages out, which goes to the point we were talking about earlier with the arresting 3 of us to prevent the evading standards from going out. And there was a later case where they also conducted a campaign of harassment. They specifically identified 10 people to have a campaign of harassment against, of which they knew that 3 were actively involved in. This is in the run-up to the May Day 2000 action, guerrilla gardening action, where we were just going to plant things in Parliament Square. They conducted a campaign of harassment against 3 people who were involved and 7 who weren't, deliberately as it were, to avoid any kind of giving away of what they actually knew, to make it look like it was more random. So they were doing the psychological thing, undermining good PR, demonizing us as if we were violent, spreading propaganda to make out that we were violent, which obviously has the sort of self-fulfilling effect of making it less likely that people who don't want to be involved in any kind of disorder or violence, they are less likely to show up. People who actually quite attracted to the idea of a ruck are more likely to show up. So it becomes self-fulfilling, and we work really hard to disperse all that throughout the Reclaim the Streets' history. You know, there was obviously a spectrum of opinions about how you approach, you know, how there's a spectrum of opinion on non-violence and, you know, complete pacifism, as in turn the other cheek, to acceptance of you know, defense, as Emily was talking about earlier, and people talked about that. But I was able to say with complete confidence, despite having largely dropped out of Reclaim the Streets from, you know, 1997 onwards, that, you know, even from knowing the people who were still going to the meetings, no proposal that would have involved planning for disorder or violence would have ever got through Reclaim the Streets' consensus decision-making process. In that sense, I could be very confident that, any attempt to say, that there were some news stories about how Reclaim the Streets was stockpiling. What were we stockpiling?
Arms, CS gas. There were all kinds of things. But yeah, there was a definite. Yeah, CS gas was the one, because I was just like, what would we use CS gas for?
And stun guns as
No,
well.
there were some just absolutely outlandish media stories. I mean, I have to say that I was, having really lived through that period from like the organization of J18 up to essentially the kind of demise of Reclaim the Streets. And I remember that time, and I remember the incredible energy and excitement and the amazing stuff that we did, and then the gradual burnout of individuals, but also of the whole group. And I was really struck, and this is stuff that I think may come out more in the questioning of Bishop, and will certainly is laid out in considerable detail in the Reclaim the Streets witness statement. But by this this kind of sequence of events where, I remember you had, Reclaim the Streets happened, and we were all amazed that it happened, and that I remember being there on the day, and we were trying to get our bit of the crowd. We were supposed to go on the tube, but they shut the tube, so we were walking them through the streets with a A to Z, trying to figure out where we were going, and waving our flags, and going past the Bank of England, which had a full fleet of riot horses in front of it to defend it. And we weren't going to the Bank of England, so we saw the riot police, and we nipped off down another road, and we went off to the Futures Exchange, the Liffey building, and there were no police there. And the whole plan went off. And I remember thinking after that, well, that's 100 people who we just know they're not cops, they're not informants, because there were 100 people knew that plan the day before, and the police didn't know it. And it turns out they did. And that was the biggest shock for me when I found out that Jim Boyling had been an undercover police officer, was they knew the whole plan. They knew we were going to the Futures Exchange, and they didn't defend the Futures Exchange.
And what's extraordinary is that we have a document. Am I allowed to say this? Someone who knows the shit.
I don't know.
You're allowed,
I'm going to say it anyway. And if there's a copy, fuck off. I don't care. You can come and get me.
No, you can say it to the extent that I talked about it on Wednesday, and I did talk quite a bit about it. So that's fine.
So what is really extraordinary is all the documents that list the plans, which start, we planned J18 for a year. And of course, when all the press came out after the £1 million worth of damage done to the financial district, the whole thing was, this group never talks to the police. This is why it went.
We had no idea what they were going to do.
Upside down.
No way of knowing.
They said it in Parliament.
And yeah, they said it in Parliament. There's a big parliamentary inquiry thing. And so Jim was in the group of 10 that knew everything. And also in all the notes we see and all the reports for the SDS, it says very clearly, even in one that says it comes out, I think 2 weeks before, which lists literally hour by hour exactly what we're going to do. The thing where we use these carnival masks to split the crowd into 4 different ways, which the cops afterwards called the starburst effect, and saying it was the most organized, most well-organized action they'd ever seen in public order things, and so on. And basically it lists all this. Says we're going to go to the London International Futures Exchange, and then in big black and white letters on the top goes, "Do not give to city police." So basically, the Met were not giving the information to the city police. Why, we don't know. We mustn't forget that there's been a kind of rivalry between the city and the crown since the Middle Ages. The city wants its kind of medieval autonomy financial autonomy and you know, it's more anarchist than the crown in this weird kind of capitalist way, and they want self-management, and also the Met and the city police. The Met has always wanted to abolish the city police, so we feel we were part of a kind of turf war, that's spelled with a U, and that it kind of the city police. Basically, what happened is the city police wanted to, when we announced the thing, the city police said, we'll do the public order. And if I remember rightly, the Met said, no, you're not going to do public order. You don't do public order. You did a bit of this stop the city stuff in the 80s, but the last time you did a major public order thing was the Gordon riots in the 18th century. So, you know, we'll deal with it. And the city police said, no way. And then they did a double gold. They did double central command thing, which I don't think they've ever done before. And the city police basically didn't know what was happening. What happened. And the Met then said, well, it's the city police's fault. And they changed the law. And from what we know now, it seems like when Occupy happened in 2011, it was the city police that did public order. The Met police that did public order. So yeah, I would just love to see the faces of some of the city police officers and the head of the city police when they find this out, or if they don't know this already, or you know, and yeah, on the mayor of London, you know, the mayor of the city of London, I'd love to, who said we were terrorists on TV the next day.
So I think to the earlier point about what are the reasons for the way that we are policed, it's worth saying that in addition to all the ones we've talked about earlier, breaking the spirits of people, preventing our agitprop from going out, creating a greater likelihood, not a lesser likelihood of disorder, it also sounds as if one of the other things that was going on was sort of institutional rivalry within sort of the secret state. And I think it's just worth going on from there. I suspect I'm going to go to the same point you're about to take me to, Donal, which is also what was going on between the spy cops and police informants, which I don't know whether that's what you're about to put your hand up for.
No, it's different, but it's to do with the public order thing, which is immediately after J18, there's what's called Operation Benbow. It's a total rewriting from top to bottom of the entire public order strategy, the Metropolitan Police. That's the one that basically takes the City of London Police out of the picture and gives complete control. And the first test of that, and this is why it's relevant to spy cops, is the Oxford Kettling case. And the Oxford circus in 2001, which we'll hear back from Lois Lane and Carlo Soracchi because of what comes around. But yeah, there's a whole set of total restructuring. And it's interesting, it all comes back to the failure of J18 to control public order, which we now know was based on faulty intelligence, and not once in the Benbow review, because I've got most of the documents for that, did he mention the failure to pass on, or even the acknowledgement that Jim Boyling was at the heart of that disorder.
So
can I just say that's Lois Austin and not Lois Lane? I think Lois Lane's a character in Grease.
I have met Lois Austin's partner. I mean, I wouldn't say he was Superman, but I don't know.
He's a nice guy.
Nice guy. Just on the informer thing.
One of the things we've been doing is to sort of set up questions that we want the inquiry to ask Jim Boyling next week. And of them, we've lots of questions we've been feeding through our own barristers, but one of them is what was his understanding of why his intelligence was not passed on. We know that his own statement contains the comment that he understands there was rivalry between the Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police, and I mentioned that the other day. So go on, expand on that, because whatever Jim Boyling now says next week could be very helpful in helping us to prepare further questions for his management, bearing in mind that Jim Boyling has no love of his former employer by now, because he's the only police officer, the only spy cop who has been disciplined, sacked from the police for his part in it. So setting him up with questions that might help us to then formulate further questions for his management is part of what we're doing here.
Yeah, totally. I think just picking up on that thing about informers. I mean, you did have questions from at the inquiry about the approaches that the police made towards you to become an informer. Also talked about the way in which you were followed by police officers in the lead up to that. And I really just sort of like kind of pointing out that these clandestine police operations, like the SDS, like go hand in hand with overt police repression and like approaches to activists to become informers, people being followed, people being intimidated on the street by uniform officers, as well as the use of undercovers. And like we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the SDS don't exist in a vacuum. Now, the relationship between these undercovers and the informers, we don't know. We've got some ideas, but it'll be interesting to find out how much, because there's so much like double jobbing. There's so many situations where you've got an undercover officer in a group, as well as informants, infiltrators, grasses, corporate spies, like so many different elements. Yeah, so in terms of like the other questions that you got from the inquiry, there was a lot of stuff about how the factual inaccuracies in Jim Boyling's reports, the way he sexed things up, the exaggeration of the splits that existed within Reclaim the Streets as a group, the role that Jim Boyling himself took in like setting up so many things, like the use of the cars to block the roads on the June the 18th action, and so much that kind of the Jim Boyling not just was aware of, but was actively involved in organising, and really showing that it's not just that these officers were like right at the heart of things to know what was going on, but actually part of making it happen.
Can I just say on that point, because I think, this is comes from GRD's evidence, which happened in the afternoon, but I think it's a really interesting juxtaposition because GRD was not involved in the planning and organisation of June the 18th. He wasn't involved with Reclaim the Streets at the time, but he was recruited by Jim Boyling to drive a car that was one of the 4 cars which were driven to the area by the Futures Exchange and crashed in order to, crashed at slow speed, like basically put across the road in order to close that road so that the carnival could take place. And he basically recounted how Jim came to him with this plan. And Jim bought the cars, Jim told them where to go. But apparently he even set up where GRD was going to spend the night that night. And
the phones.
Yep, bought phones, put credit on the phones. So there's this real agent provocateur role played by Jim, where he forms this affinity group of 4 people in order to do that part of the action. But that whole section of the action was basically organised and run and led by an undercover cop. So, and it was a fundamentally important part of the day, that the success of getting that massive group of people taking the road outside the Futures Exchange and holding what was, for anybody who was there, one of the best days ever.
100%. Let's say that again.
Party.
One of the best days ever.
That was GRD's take on it. essentially, was he said, I had a mission, I got there, I did my mission, and then I went and had a bloody good party. That's what it was. But there was this element of the Metropolitan Police setting the City of London Police up to lose control of the situation. And that is what started a riot. And actually, one of the things that really turned the day nasty on June the 18th was there was a group of people who, before the incredible starburst organised movement of the crowd to where they were going, there was a group of a couple of thousand people, I think, a few hundred people certainly, that wandered off. And the police panicked and attacked that group of people who didn't know where they were going. They weren't one of the coordinated groups. And police actually ran a woman over with a van. And it was the news that spread that the police had killed somebody that day. Actually, she wasn't killed. She survived, but she was properly run over under the van. People who saw that, phoning that information through, that was one of the things that actually turned the mood dark on that day. It was the police losing control and very badly injuring somebody. That loss of control by the City of London police was instrumentalized in so many ways after J18. We've talked about how it was instrumentalized by the Metropolitan Police to gain more power themselves and gain more control over policing in London. It was also instrumentalized to against Reclaim the Streets, to try and undermine the message and the actions and the things that Reclaim the Streets were doing. And it was used to justify undercover policing for many, many years, long after Reclaim the Streets ceased to exist, actually. I mean, I think one of the interesting things that we saw as Reclaim the Streets was the amount of disclosure that we got about other organisations like the Wombles, like Disarm Dicey, like Indie Media, all of which applied for core participant status and didn't get it. First, the number of undercover police reports that link those organisations to Reclaim the Streets in order to justify spying on them. They essentially created this spectre of Reclaim the Streets as something that could then justify all kinds of things in policing. And you see this in the run-up to the next actions that happened. So the November 30th action to coincide with the World Trade Organization meeting in Seattle at the end of 1999. And then later on the next year in the May Day action, that what's going on behind the scenes isn't how do we prevent disorder? It is how do we destroy this group? And that's what really struck me, because I remember those years, and I remember the levels of police harassment and the levels of burnout that I and my friends suffered, and the number of people who were involved in organising an event like that, and we're just like, never again, never again. And the discovery that that was intentional, that there were meetings within Special Branch and meetings within Jim Boyling about how best to prevent RTS from getting their message out, how best to undermine the media coverage of those events, and how best to harass and burn people out, and this whole psychological thing that Emily was talking about. Actually, I found it quite shocking and quite upsetting, that the explicitness of it.
But I mean, you know, I don't think we should forget that that is the job of the state. I mean, you know, the job of the state is to undermine and destroy social movements that are a threat to the status quo. And in the 90s, you know, these movements, you know, historically, this was an incredible moment. This was you know, J18 was part of the seeds that came from the Zapatistas, that came from all the social movements that were joining up in the People's Global Action at that point. You know, it was a real moment. It was J18 was took place. There were similar actions in financial districts in, I think, 55 other cities at the same time. It was also the beginning of the internet being used and really new tools coming out from activists. J18 was the beginning of us. First time I ever saw videos or photos coming directly, which now is so normal, but in 99 that wasn't the case, coming from live from another protest, was during J18, where there was an Indie Media thing set up. It was pre-Indie Media, but it was the seeds of Indie Media. And there was a serious threat to, it was also these movements coming together in a massive diversity and pointing to capitalism as the issue and saying, we're not going to just march, we're actually going to take direct action. We're not just going to be doing march protests. And so, yeah, I think it's worth really remembering how it was a historical moment of a possible kind of breach, a possible you know, in the status quo, in the rise of neoliberalism, and of course, you know, the state has to destroy these movements. That is their job, you know. So it's kind of also very strange to do this, you know, that we're, we're shocked and we're not shocked. And yeah, I think there's a whole complexity of emotions in this whole experience, actually, of, you know, doing this inquiry, because also we're kind of, you know, helping the state to do this better with less violence, we hope.
Well,
And we hope
certainly
that's the
not to
whole-
write it down. I mean, I think that when I say shocked, it's not so much that I'm shocked that it happened. It's that I'm shocked that it is so
in black and white. Yeah.
it's so explicit, and it's so in black and white, and it's so unashamed. Like,
I think, though, I'm always reminded of the words of a comrade of ours, Lisa, who points out that, you know, shocked but not surprised. That, you know, we don't stop being shocked. It is shocking. The fact that it's like it is the case, the fact the state is there purely to serve the interests of the aristocracy and defend their interests in all its forms. You know, we know it. It's not surprising. But it is shocking. It never stops being shocking. It will always be shocking because it is such an appalling way to behave. I mean,
and also because the state does also have this pretense. It's like, yes, we believe in human rights. Well, a key human right is the right to protest. But we'll just, except when it's not convenient, then we'll shoot you or we'll kill you. Or, but, you know, also, it's like, to agree with Jay's point, you know, it's like, it's the British state that, you know, did the Mau Mau suppression, they did this Malaysian insurgency in Northern Ireland. You know, it's like, why are we being shocked by a state that soldiers went out and shot kids on the street in Derry? You know, it's like,
well, no, but we should be. I mean, I feel very strongly about this. I feel very strongly that what Tom just said, just because we know that that's what they do, does not make it less shocking. It does not make it less unacceptable, and you mustn't internalize it and normalize it. You know, it's still not okay. I mean, it's like, you know, I'm not shocked by men. I'm not surprised, by, you know, men sexually abusing or raping people. It does not stop it being shocking, and it's not something that you should normalize and accept and say, well, that's just what they do. That's a really problematic way of thinking about it.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Just quickly, there's 100 people watching now. 12 people have liked it. Please if you can, please share this video as it's going out. Sorry, I just wanted to get that in.
Yes, I was just going to say, firstly, I reflect that, you know, before they started to come out, all the spy cop stuff, I and I think a lot of other people assumed that phones were being bugged, you know, homes were being bugged, whatever, that they were gathering intelligence that way. We started to know that, you know, Reclaim the Streets was clearly being infiltrated. I'll come to that in 2 secs. Just one other thing I want to talk about here. But I don't think we expected that it was going to be close friends, people who were forming relationships through our networks. I think that when it first started to come out 10 years ago, that actually really was shocking. And you're absolutely right. We should never lose sight of that. I just wanted to touch on a little, a moment of ironic levity right at the end of my questioning session, when after all of this discussion about all of these ways in which the police were doing things for all the wrong reasons and were, you know, how the policing was utterly political and was nothing to do with disrupting disorder. It was a whole load of other things besides. And then Mitting sort of said, well, thank you for your input. You've you know, this is a free country and you've exercised your freedom of speech. And everyone just laughed in the galleries. This little moment of liberty that after all the evidence that I and everybody else in the inquiry had been presenting, that she was still able to say this is a free society.
Yeah, I mean, just like a joke. I mean, like ridiculous. I mean, just it's so ridiculous. Funny, I did bump into Mitting in the hallway during the lunch break, and like he said, he said hello to me and Dave Morris, and Dave Morris said, well, just replied by going, "Well, it's a free country." And he went, to which Mitty went, "Yes, it is." I went, I'm not convinced, John. I'm really not convinced.
Can I just say, because I've just had a quick glance at the comments, and you mentioned there's 100 people watching, and quite a lot of the comments are what on earth is this chat about?
Yeah, sorry, I mean,
So could we just do a quick reintroduction?
No. I think it's very
They're
important to say
bots.
we should just please ignore the trolls. There are bots. There are quite a few bots that I'm trying to. I delete a lot of them. The offensive ones. There are a lot of nonsense ones that they only ever turn up on the vertical video on YouTube. I don't think we need to do that. I mean, I think the vast majority of people who are watching are fully aware that this is about the undercover policing inquiry. They're going out mostly on channels which are, everything's branded. There's a underneath this video, there's a description of what this is about, including a link. There are some comments with some questions. Perhaps we'll go to some of those just to break things up a bit. We've got one here from a Guido Tallman, who's giving evidence on the 9th of March. You might get the idea of what the pseudonym is relating to, given who is giving evidence on the 9th of March. And he asks, as a CP, he's going to be taking questions. Any advice? I mean, given that amongst us, only Roger so far has given evidence, is there anything you'd like to say to Guido Tallman about what he should say when being questioned, Roger?
I'd be very happy to have a further conversation when I know a bit more about what you're giving evidence about. But my first thoughts are, firstly, don't be put off by the counsel to inquiry. To be fair, my counsel inquiry did alert me beforehand that he was expecting to have, to give a certain amount of, I've got to put some difficult questions to you because that's me doing my job. And we know that some of those difficult questions will have been sent by in my case, by Jim Boyling's lawyers, to try and, throw me off track or whatever. So don't take it personally, just answer the question, see it for what it is. That is the public inquiry doing their job on behalf of the other side, being neutral, supposedly. So just, stay calm, see it for what it is, use it as an opportunity to keep your core messages. Literally in the last few minutes, I kind of prepared notes. I mean, everyone has different ways of how you prepare. I'd prepared a sort of a lengthier sort of set of notes with lots of quotes and lots of document references. And then I was told at shortly beforehand that I probably wasn't going to be allowed by the chair to take them into the witness box. Actually, I was, but when it came to it, I'd prepared, on literally in the last few minutes, a really concise set of notes, which then when at the end of the session, I was asked, Mr. Geffen, is there anything else you want to say? And it's like, yes, quite a lot. And I just went into everything that still needed saying, because I'd got a complete list of it right in front of me. And I kind of, all of the points that I've been making this evening about, first, well, as I say, key point, they were not doing it to prevent disorder. We never had plans for disorder. They had all of these other ulterior motives, and then a whole load of questions for that you want the inquiry to then put to the cops that come after you. Those are the things. If you've got a really good crisp set of notes of those key points, and you can kind of tick them off as you go along if you feel you don't need to restate them at the end, but just get yourself really prepared for that. And finally, question that I did get, and I think that I finally felt myself let off the leash and off I went.
It's very worth listening to the last 10 minutes of Roger Geffen's evidence from this last Wednesday morning.
Absolutely.
There's a 10-minute run through of some of the really big issues that if you want to prepare for hearing Jim Boyling being questioned, I think that's a really powerful place to start, is with Roger Geffen's closing speech.
And it was amazing. And I mean, we talked about, Roger, I hope this is okay. You don't feel that you're being outed. But, I think one of the other reasons the judge took you seriously is that you're not a free man of the city, but you do have a CBE, which I did try and get Roger to wear. But MBE. Well, you should now get an OBE or CBE or an XBE or whatever the highest level, or the QBE, because you were fucking brilliant.
Thanks for that question, Guido. If anybody else has got any other questions or any other comments, please do leave a comment. We will read them out.
I think on that, it is worth going back to looking at the evidence of people like Lois and stuff, where they've had various things, and just see, it's not necessarily reading through them all, but like anting around the Battle of Welling, where they really try to hammer home the points about, but you all went there for a fight, and just see how people responded in those moments. It's just, they're quite powerful moments. Oh,
Absolutely.
Dan Gilman dealing with the violence fascism
Yeah.
was another really good one.
Really good one. I mean, there's been a few of the witnesses have really taken the opportunity of that. Any further questions to really like hammer home some of the really important points, which I think have come across incredibly well. Just going back to Roger's evidence. As Kate said, June the 18th was an incredible day. One of the most powerful ones, really influential on so many of us, myself included, in terms of activism. It was something which I'm really, really glad I got to experience the whole day of what was quite something. It was very influential. It went on to have a really big impact on what got called summit hopping, the holding of like protests against large intergovernmental meetings like G8, the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the European Union. A lot of these protests kind of resulted in camps. Those particularly then when in the UK with the G8 in Gleneagles, those camps then influenced what became the Camp for Climate Action, or Climate Camp as it was better known. And then there was a series of questions to Roger about that, and for the first time, questions about Mark Kennedy, the undercover police officer whose unmasking, I guess, was one of the first dominoes to fall in this whole Spike Up saga. His unmasking whilst he was still undercover, though no longer a police officer. He was a private investigator, a private infiltrator by that point. Not someone who, Roger, as you said, you were particularly close to, but I think it's worth remarking on that this is the first time that he's been mentioned, the first mention of NPORU officers, something we'll be hearing a lot more of in tranche 4 of the inquiry. The role he played. There was a whole bunch of anecdotes about his behaviour at those climate camps, and how important the role of yet another officer with a van in the movement turned out to be. I know obviously. I think all of us had contact with Mark Kennedy when he was deployed undercover, not least you, Kate, obviously. Is anything you want to say about Roger, or any of you about the Mark Kennedy questions? Fair enough.
Well, no, what I would say about the Mark Kennedy questions is to go back to the point Emily made, that Roger's being questioned about Mark Kennedy, but actually none of the disclosure about Mark Kennedy's involvements in those events. I mean, I assume they were putting those questions to Roger now because they want to avoid having to call him back. He's here giving evidence, and they want to avoid having to call him back in the next tranche. But what it does is it just shows up the ridiculousness of the way that they are trying to split the SDS, the Special Demonstration Squad, who was set up in 1968 and was still spying in 2000 to 2008, and the NPOIU, the National Public Order Intelligence Unit, which is the unit that Mark Kennedy worked for, who started their work in around 1998 and went right through until Mark Kennedy was uncovered in 2010, and it was shut down in 2011. So there's this 8-year overlap between the two units, but the way that the inquiry has done its handling of the evidence and the witnesses is to try to say, well, we're going to look at the officers from the SDS and then we'll look at the officers from the NPOIU. But for us, who were spied on by both, it's a totally false dichotomy. And I think for those of us who are going to give evidence in tranche 4, it's slightly less problematic because we will have seen the disclosure from tranche 3, and we may not get to say what we want to say about the officers in tranche 3, but we will be able to bring that into it in tranche 4. But for people like Roger, who are being questioned now, they're having questions put to them about Mark Kennedy, or specifically you having questions put to you about Mark Kennedy, and you haven't seen any of the disclosure, and there's undoubtedly way more layers and way more going on there that's going to come out later on. And I think it's very, very problematic the way that they've done it. And I think it's particularly problematic because I know from my own case that went through the Investigatory Powers Tribunal that the police are very, very keen to put what the lawyers described as clear blue water between the Special Demonstration Squad, which I think is dead in the water, utterly discredited, quite clearly rogue unit doesn't even begin to cover it. Like a criminal gang, I think, is closer to the mark. And the National Public Order Intelligence Unit, which is a lot closer to whatever kinds of surveillance stuff they are doing now, which was staffed by officers who, many of whom will still be serving police officers within the Metropolitan Police. And they really don't want the two to be mixed. And I think that this period where we're seeing the crossover between the two units is incredibly important from that point of view. So I found it very interesting that they were asking questions about Mark Kennedy, and I think it was very unfair to put questions. I actually, when he first said Mark Kennedy, I thought he'd made a mistake. I thought he must be talking about Jason Bishop or somebody else. And then I realized he actually was talking about Mark Kennedy. I think it's very, very problematic that the inquiry is asking people about officers from Tranche 4 before those witnesses have had a chance to see any of that evidence or really understand the significance of the spying by those officers.
Because they asked about one particular incident, which I think it's quite significant one. It's when Mark gets injured and he comes back and then he tries to run into a police officer. You know, it's like, this is one of the many key moments in Mark Kennedy. It's like, yeah, here it comes out of the blue. There's no real context for it. There's, we've seen next to no disclosure around it. It's just to echo Kate's point. It's like, it's not just a set of annual questions. It's very important issues that are coming up, and they are treating a bit too casually.
Yeah, absolutely.
We found out.
Oh yes, we can hear you, Carolyn.
Oh, great. We did find out the other day that actually this incident with the van happened before Mark Kennedy was injured, which makes it even more interesting, and possibly it's to do with the injunctions. So maybe Roger.
So, I mean, I can talk a bit about that incident because I have, through the IPT, seen a certain amount of disclosure about that event. And because of the injunction, so we're talking about 2006. It's the Drax climate camp, and there was an injunction put on, I believe, the Drax power station, basically making it contempt of court, essentially, for activists to take action against that power station. And Mark Kennedy was going around that event looking for, in fact, initially trying to organize his own banner drop action off-site, somewhere where the injunction did not apply. And he initially tried to organize his own action, and eventually he got involved in an action at Hartlepool nuclear power station, which was a long way off-site. It was quite a long way away. I mean, Roger tells the story of what happened, and every single person on that action was arrested, including the legal observers and the press reporters. Everybody who was there was arrested. And it appears that the entire intention around this and the arrest of those people was essentially in order to give Mark Kennedy a reasonable excuse for not getting involved in injunction breaking actions around Drax power station, which he then did, because I was arrested with him about 2 or 3 days later, attempting to get into Drax power station, and that's where he got beaten up. So and I was actually arrested because he got beaten up, and I refused to leave his side because he had serious head injuries and was unrecognizable because of the blood and bruising on his face. And I told the officer that I wasn't leaving him and I would go with him to the police cell, and I was cautioned and taken with him. Feel like a bit of an idiot about that now, but
not at all.
It's the only thing that has ever shown up on my PNC check as well. But yes, so that whole incident around Drax, and it goes on, and I mean I think I deal with some of it in my book, but it does go on, and it's going to come up in Tranche 4, and it's massive, and there's a lot of really important disclosure around it. So and many different facets of issues around it as well. So
we've had a couple more questions. One from Clarice 007. Does anyone here agree with what Joe Batty said about the Grenfell community? This is just going back to something we heard about on Monday. Joe Batty went on to, years after he was infiltrated by Carlo Soracchi, went on to work as a community outreach worker in North Kensington, obviously the place where the Grenfell Tower is. And he said as part of his role, he was meeting with members of that community who were organising around the injustices that was a result of that fire. And he said he found it incredibly difficult not to point out to them that they were probably being spied on by undercover police, or if not, other forms of police surveillance. I think he was probably right. I would have struggled not to have said that if I would have said that. I guess in the professional setting, he wasn't had the opportunity to do so.
I think there's a bit of a rebranding going on. And you what's called community tension teams, or which Lambert was actually perfectly involved in. It's like they've got different ways to actually monitoring or things, but they'll be looking at all the social media comments, they'll be doing their own little profile. So it's like it's not going to be classic special branch surveillance, but it's also not going to be 100 miles away from it. But unfortunately, we do give them an awful lot in just going on Facebook all the time.
Yeah, we strongly suspect
I think the evidence that we heard in Tranche 3 Part 1, where we heard from a lot of these campaigns for justice, grieving families, campaigns for justice for people whose loved ones were killed by the police. And we will be hearing in this tranche coming up from the family of John Charles de Menezes, who was brutally shot dead by police at, I think, Stockwell Tube Station in 2005. And his family was spied on. We heard from the family of Stephen Lawrence and many other families who, following the success of the Lawrence family's campaign, basically anybody who had any family who had, or any community who had that kind of grievance about the way that the police or the state had handled their tragedy, became a threat to PR. And as we mentioned earlier, like in this period, you have the development of this idea that the police are there to prevent embarrassment to the government. And I think that's a I just don't think we can stress enough how far that is not the job of the police, to prevent embarrassment to the government.
And also, again, going back to Joe Batty's evidence, just how much they were using the line, oh, we were infiltrating these justice campaigns in order to protect them from other people who wanted to support them. It's like that narrative, which has been there since the 80s, is clearly still going on.
And let's not forget, the Metropolitan Police are institutionally racist.
Yeah.
And it
Sexist,
another
bastards.
point that cannot be stressed enough, and institutionally corrupt.
And anti-democratic.
Yeah, and they hate, the police hate criticism of policing, which becomes political in a way. Always.
Yeah.
And I think they also hate, we were talking about it earlier on with the Trafalgar Square stuff. They hate it when our campaigns join up. They cannot accept that we join together in solidarity, because that is the essence of our politics, and that we have these connections and that we want to work together. And that's how, I think they do know that's how we want to build a better world. And that's what they want to destroy. And they do that, there's this narrative of, these extremists trying to subvert legitimate protest, as if they're like these two polar opposite things, rather than this ecosystem of movements and fights for justice that we do want to bring together. And this language is just appalling. And yeah.
Yep, 100% agree. There's that was kind of the end of just got to the end of Roger's evidence. Is there anything else anybody wants to add about that before we move on to GRD?
Sorry, there's one other point. I know this is going to be a bit of a detail after that lovely big picture point that Emily's just made, but I think there's one other thing that we didn't touch on, which was one of the other police's motivations was to just gain commendations and kudos for their own unit. And this,
gong hunting.
Sorry?
It was called
Trophy
gong hunting.
Yes. Okay. There was
What
one
hunting?
specific instance
Gong.
where this came became apparent was when there was a plan among some people involved in RTS. It was never actually an RTS action to stop an oil tanker heading over Dartford Bridge. The plan was to have a couple of cars out in front of this oil tanker, stop in front of it as it slowed down at one of the toll booths. It would then sort of be blocking one toll booth. It wouldn't be able to move. Some people would climb on top of it with banners about, we need to stop oil. I can't remember exactly what the banner would have said. Jim Boyling was clearly part of this plan. He claimed that myself and one other person were organisers of it. That was untrue. One of the many untruths in his evidence. I suspect, but can't be sure, that he was actually covering up what his own role was in instigating in this plan. I don't actually remember much of his role in instigating the plan, but he was definitely one of the van drivers. He knew beforehand that the plan was, safely climb onto a lorry when it was stopped at a toll booth. Afterwards, they were making out that there's an incredibly dangerous plan that could have stopped the whole of the M25 and brought absolute chaos and massive cost, not just to the police but the emergency services. And haven't we done well by frustrating it? So that is just one other thing that of all the many mixed messages, mixed motivations that the police had, that's just one other to throw into the mix. Sorry, that's taken it back, but I do think your point about the big picture of the ultimate objective was to stop powerful movements from coming together. I think that point is really well made.
But I think it's really important what you say, because there's a lot of weird contradictions where it's like, I just don't get it. Why would they do that? And there is this constant tension between, on the one hand, this kind of greater scheme of things, kind of state repression of dissent. And then on the other hand, there's this bunch of kind of middle manager British cops trying to maintain their funding, keep their jobs, fiddle their expenses sheets. And there's this kind of constant tension between those two motivations and those two processes that you kind of have to understand both to really understand a lot of what goes on in the evidence that we see.
Absolutely. We've got 16 people liking it. There's 118 people watching. Please share. Please, please like. Please, if anybody's got any further comments, please add them. Once we got to the end of Roger's questioning, again, it must be said, you did a fantastic job, Roger. Really, really impressive display. Really managed to stay calm, stay on topic, get across all the information. I should just point out, for those who aren't aware, I do reaction videos throughout the day of the hearings. Usually it's people who've been watching the inquiry alongside me who react to what we've just heard. Occasionally, I'm lucky enough to be able to get the witness to come and join me, as was the case with Roger. After he finished giving his evidence, we had a sit down and a chat about what he just said. Really worth checking out. I'll just put the link on screen. You can see all the videos from all the reaction videos on the Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance website. There's about 5 a day on a good day, sometimes 4. Worth your time if you want a deeper dive into just the raw reaction to what was just said, and in the case of when Roger gave evidence, from Roger himself. So check that out if you're able to. We then heard from GRD.
Sorry, just before you move on, I just want to pick up. Gerald Hepburn has made a comment in the chat, and we did talk about this earlier. How many people who should have been called have not been called, and I absolutely agree. It's complete lottery that I did get called. I did make the point, and I will continue to make the point. There were so many people who knew more about the spying. JJ here on the call right now knew much more about firstly, JJ's own arrest in the ahead of the evading standards. Also, all that stuff we were talking about earlier around the June 18th policing, and indeed an occasion when JJ was arrested with Jim Boyling during office occupation. And that's just one case where, you know, somebody knew more about the policing. And then, of course, there are all the people who knew more about, you know, the personal intrusion. You know, I just happened to get called to give evidence. I really don't know why. It may be because actually this point that touched on earlier, because my evidence said that I'd got an MBE and that the chair of the inquiry quite liked that. Utterly random, but there I was. I just, well, I hope I did the best with the fact that I'd got the space there, but I did also make the point that others should have been called ahead of me with you.
Yeah, I mean, that has been such a hallmark of the who's been called. Anybody with who's got a lordship, any professors, anybody with any sort of freeman of the City of London, anything like that's kind of put somebody apart in the way in which the establishment respects is called as a witness. If you haven't got that, it's even more of a lottery whether you be called or not. Someone who
the less they have, the better.
Yes, the next witness seemed fairly ACAB. I don't get the impression that GRD has got an MBE.
He didn't write his own statement. Apparently, the lawyers wrote it. So I think the statement was probably less ACAB than he was on the stand.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's very much a very different style, very different approach we got from GRD. As we've already mentioned a couple of times, some detail about the kind of questions that he got. It was a much shorter period. He was involved in the Good Easter hunt case, but most of the questions related to stuff to do with his involvement with Jim Boyling, to do with Reclaim the Streets, what happened on June the 18th, where he was one of the drivers who took one of the cars that crashed and blocked the road. He was someone who was involved in the McLiable support campaign. He did a stand at Glastonbury Festival in '97, which Jim Boyling sort of joined him at, and basically spent the entire weekend hanging out with Jim, because he'd been on that Good Friday hunt where they had a fairly traumatic experience together as comrades behind a fence while they're being attacked by a gate, being attacked by the hunters. They became close friends through that, comrades. Someone he trusted. We've already talked a bit about how there was a lot of like gossip and sort of slagging off, taking the piss out of other activists that Jim Boyling engaged with GRD. He considered him a mate. Talked about him being present at like meetings where they talked about a plan to kidnap Dolly the sheep. It was meetings of
liberate. I think is the
liberate. Yes, yes, absolutely. That's me just writing there. Yeah, absolutely liberate Dolly the sheep. It was a lot shorter. GRD was giving very, very short answers, which was the contrast with Roger's evidence couldn't be more marked, really. There was a lot of answers that just went, yep, or nope. Which was...
You didn't ask to slow down,
a man of few words.
Can I say something about the Good Easter part of the questioning? Because I think, this goes back to the very beginnings of Jim Boyling's deployment, and I think it's actually got a lot more significant than it came across. So Jim Boyling was initially deployed, like so many of the undercover police officers before him, and like Bob Lambert specifically, who was his manager and mentor, to spy on animal rights movements in East London, to go join a Hunt Sab group, get into the Hunt Sab group, and the raison d'etre of all this was to find a way into the Animal Liberation Front, the ALF. And so he's part of this Hunt Sab group. We've heard a lot of evidence from Hunt Sabs, particularly in tranche 2, about just how completely inappropriate it was for them to be putting spies into the Hunt Sab groups, and also how completely irrational and wrong the suggestion was that by going into these Hunt Sab groups, they were somehow a sort of gateway group to the ALF. And The Good Easter arrests, there were a number of people arrested in Good Easter in Essex, at what was described as a national hit, where various different groups from around the country went to a particular hunt that was known to be quite problematic and quite violent and quite difficult to sab the hunt. And the group in the van that Jim Boyling was with stopped in a car park before the hunt had even started, early in the morning, had a game of football. Police came along, searched the van, and then arrested a bunch of the people who were in that van. And GRD was also arrested on that national hit of the Good Easter hunt, but in a different van in a different place somewhere else, which is why the questioning of him about that matter was so brief, because he was asked what he knew about Jim Boyling's role in it, and the answer was nothing. But there are other court participants who do know a lot about Jim Boyling's role in that, and he actually offered to be a witness. I mean, well, first of all, he was the only person from the van that day who was involved in a physical altercation with the police. And we very much hope that the videos, because there were police videos of the arrests and the videos of him basically piling in seemingly to try and de-arrest somebody and ending up in a fight with the cops, will be shown by the inquiry. And he then offered to be a witness. The solicitors in the case were Bindmans. The barrister in the case was Keir Starmer. And Jim Boyling offered to be a witness, wrote a witness statement, and admits to having gone to the courthouse on the day and stayed outside in a cafe. So the case never actually got to trial. I think parts of the case were dropped and anyway, eventually nobody was convicted and the trial didn't happen. So he never actually did take the stand that time in his false name. But he certainly was in communication with the solicitors and possibly also with Keir Starmer as counsel who was representing the defendants. And so it is going to be a bigger issue than it appeared when GRD was questioned. The only reason it didn't come up was because, like, despite having been arrested on the same day in the same rough geographical area, he wasn't actually involved in any of the, he wasn't involved in the trial. He wasn't involved in the arrests. He wasn't in the van with Jim on the day. I think there's going to be quite a few more questions for Jim about that initial deployment into the animal rights movement and whether or not he did, as he claims in his commendation applications and everything else, get anywhere near ALF plots or provide any useful intelligence at all from that period. What we do know is that he very, very quickly, despite claiming that he'd found valuable intelligence on violent animal rights activists and the Animal Liberation Front, he very quickly redeploys into Reclaim the Streets. And it's not really clear why he did that. I mean, obviously, street parties are more fun than getting up really early in the morning on a Saturday and running through the mud and getting whipped and kicked by horses. But yeah, there's no real explanation for why he would have pulled out of supposedly getting close to what are supposed to be violent animal rights activists and moved into a group who were organising street parties with sandpits and colourful banners and puppets. Like it doesn't make sense in that context, and there's a lot of stuff around the reporting on it that doesn't make sense. So this is something that will come up in questioning of Jim Boyling, we hope,
and his manager.
Yeah, just to kind of go through some of the other questions that a GRD was brought up to him about Jim Boyling's involvement in an action in Ireland, in the Republic, to destroy some genetically modified crops. we had a very strange situation where the counsel of the inquiry said that there was no interest by the inquiry in what actually happened on the action as it happened outside of England. And the terms of reference of the inquiry are limited to England and Wales. He didn't mention Wales because nobody ever fucking does. But anyway, there were questions about the role in England of what Jim Boyling did in terms of the plan. GRD was very clear that there was no need for Jim Boyling to take part in that action. That in reality, that it was his idea. GRD said he would never have gone if it hadn't been for what Jim Boyling had done in terms of the planning. That actually the initial plan was for Irish activists to do the actual action itself. They were just going to go and support, but for whatever reason, Jim Boyling made sure that he was on the action. 6 of them did it in a van. Logistically, that was too many people. Jim Boyling had every opportunity not to take part in that action, but made sure that he did. We heard about a time when Jim Boyling asked GRD to use his van to go and collect some posters after some others had been impounded. During that errand, GRD's flat was burgled. The Hunsab two-way radios, camera, some cash, some photographs, and his turntables were stolen. It was only years later he kind of realized, of course, it was only Jim Boyling who knew that he wasn't going to be home that particular afternoon because he was doing that particular errand. We also heard about the time that Jason Bishop borrowed his van. One of the most disturbing details. Jason Bishop borrowed the van in order to use it to drive manure and seeds for the guerrilla gardening action on the 1st of May 2000 in Parliament Square. He was stopped. The van was impounded by the Metropolitan Police. When GRD finally got the van back from the police pound, he was driving it up the motorway on a lighting job. And became aware that the wheel nuts had been loosened significantly on the van. And essentially, I mean, something which could have resulted not only in his own death, but the death of many others on the motorway because it was so incredibly dangerous. This is a unit that's completely out of control. Whether it was Boyling, whether it was Jason Bishop, whether it was some other part of the police, taking actions like that really could have had incredibly serious consequences. A deeply disturbing incident.
Can I just say on the island action? I mean, it's incredible. It's this ridiculous thing with the inquiry about their terms of reference and not looking beyond UK borders unless it's something very, very serious. But actually, this was the first ever GM crop trashing that took place in Ireland, and it ultimately changed the policy of the Irish government. This kick-started a campaign in Ireland that changed the policy of the Irish government. I mean, it's absolutely gobsmacking that it was a British police officer who went over there and snuck through the night and did this action. I mean, it just beggars belief. And that this is the level of stuff that the UK police were doing outside of the UK that this inquiry isn't even looking at. And there will be a lot more of this stuff that where there wasn't a core participant involved, we're not even seeing the disclosure about it because it's outside the terms of reference. It's not going in the bundle. It's only where someone like GRD is a core participant and is named in the files, and therefore we get to see and we get to hear the evidence that these things happened.
And it's also going to apply to everything in Scotland. Like,
yes.
Even though the G8 is going to be one of the most seminal events in all of this, we are going to see very, very little because, and I think that's in a different country. It's all about diplomatic sensitivities, blah blah blah. But a quick question about the Irish one is: did the Irish police know? I was, an Irish journalist. This would be the first question I was like, how much was this, thing? And for my family who are watching, the place that got trashed was Oak Farm Estates, just outside Carlo. They'll know what that means.
The very important demographic of Donald's relatives who are a key part of our viewership. I'm not even joking.
So cute. But and what it also shows, it shows what struck me reading through all of it was how they maybe put 50% of their energy is gathering so-called intelligence, and 50% of their energy is actually keeping their cover. And the amazing amount of energy and fear, you know, whenever there's tiny little doubt or whatever. So having to do all these things to keep their cover. And I think, you know, I think we see that all along. It's, you know, the more they're involved in criminal activity, the more they feel that they're keeping their cover, or the more they're arrested, the more they're keeping criminal cover. And obviously, you know, some of those things are easier to do than others. You know, being arrested is way more complex and complicated to keep your cover and keep within the law. Trashing crops, you know, probably they were pretty sure he wasn't going to get arrested, but it would keep the cover really well.
Yeah, a lot of the majority of questions for GRD related to June the 18th, the Carnival Against Capitalism. We even saw some footage of the day. There was a lot of anecdotes of the day, little actions that happened, little things, most of which, as we've already said, GRD was like, look, I did my mission, which was to do with blocking the road with the cars. Then I went and had a bloody good party. But there were lots of other incidents that were mentioned, some of which I witnessed, some which involved other people in the room in the public gallery at the time we're in. It was a really welcome wander right down memory lane of a really wonderful day.
Really sadly, it was audio only evidence. So those of us who weren't in the hearing room didn't get to see the videos. I could hear it. I was like, oh, I want to see it.
It's on the Guardian website. But
see, the video was very boring.
Sorry?
The video was
it was quite boring.
A lot of it was very boring.
Yeah.
It was mostly just police shoving an empty car. And there was very little.
There is a lot much more interesting video of June the 18th that is available on YouTube. I really recommend people check it out. If you're unfamiliar with the event itself, there's a great deal that you can watch of it. But just to really reiterate that GRD was very clear that the action in order to shut down the road, the two sets of car crashes, the 4 cars, was entirely planned, orchestrated, and organised by Jim Boyling, that GRD would have never got involved if he hadn't been directly approached by Boyling, who laid out all the, as we've already said, all the logistics around it, from buying the cars, the burner phones that we used, the credit put on the burner phones, the places where people stayed the night before. There's no question that police had full knowledge of every aspect of that because Jim Boyling organised it. There wasn't a great deal else that GRD was questioned about. I think it was a really great moment where he was given the opportunity, as so many others have of like, is there anything else you'd like to say? And I think it's been fantastic. We already said about how brilliant Roger was when he given that opportunity to go through some really key points. But I mean, you can't really beat the cool of GRD of going, no, I'm all right, when given that opportunity. I mean, come on, fair play. You know, the guy didn't even take his coat off. He was like, yeah, he answered his questions. I think it was about 80 minutes, of which I would say 80% of it was the questions. The answers were very short. But there were some really key points that he made, and he really kind of gave some very key information, which I'm sure we will hear again when Jim Boyling is questioned, which is next week, Monday to Thursday, where he will be taken for his role in all of these things. And that was all of the evidence of the week. As I said before, Rosa was meant to be giving evidence on Thursday. She did withdraw. Hopefully she'll be back in June, but it was just those 4 witnesses for the week. I'm very aware that we're just on, we nearly getting to 2.5 hours for this video, which does put us in the same bracket as Titanic. I'm not saying which one's better, but I'm just saying we're similar lengths. No boat in this one, I'm afraid. But if there's anything,
the ship, the inquiry.
yeah, quite. Well, there was the oil tanker actually that Roger mentioned earlier. So we got a boat of our own. I don't know if you.
No, it's got wheels.
Yeah, right. So is there anything else anybody like to add?
I would just like to add for those, if some of you are watching and are going to be CPs, I think it was slightly I found it slightly problematic. The GDR, whatever his name is, or not his name, his cipher, was was very short on stuff, and it did let some stuff in that thought Mitting he could have clarified some stuff for Mitting. For example, there was a story of, so for J18, we also had a van coming in full of breeze blocks, and the CTI said, oh, and there was a van full of breeze blocks. And GRD said, oh, well, it's nothing to do with me. No one explained what the breeze blocks were for. So I had this bit of fear that Mitting would think, oh, they're bringing breeze blocks to throw. I mean, anyone who's thrown anything knows that you don't throw breeze blocks. But I don't think Mitting has ever thrown anything. So and it would have been nice if he'd said yes, that was a creative action to. And what it was for was the idea was that we would brick up the entrance to the futures exchange, which was a stock market for futures, as a kind of this is an institution we no longer need in the future. And that was done with the water from the liberated Woolbrook underground river and cement that had been brought in, and it was a beautiful action. But yeah, so I would encourage those who are doing CPs that if you are men of few words, try and bring out a few more words to help the process of not criminalizing.
I think it's really key that GRD was not involved in the organisation of Reclaim the Streets at all. He was roped in by Jim to do his specific role, and I think it's quite noticeable that the inquiry has a lot of written evidence from core participants who were. And a lot of the background evidence from the police as well about who was involved in the organisation of J18, and they have chosen not to call any of us as witnesses, but there is a lot of written evidence there. And I mean, Reclaim the Streets have put in a witness statement, which we were debating how long. None of us can remember how long it is, but it's over 280 pages. And
275, I think.
No, because we've got in the contents. I looked at the contents, and the last item in the contents is starts on page 280. So I don't know where it ends. But anyway, that statement is going to be released at the end of Boyling's evidence. Apparently, it will be published on the inquiry's website, and it goes into all of these things in a lot of detail. And I suspect the amount of work and the amount of effort and the amount of evidence that was provided by Reclaim the Streets and the individual core participants who were involved in Reclaim the Streets may be why the inquiry has decided not to call people, because they feel like they have enough already to be able to question Jim. So my hope is that this stuff will come up next week in the questioning of Jim Boyling.
If you are able to follow the questioning of Jim Boyling next week, please do so. I would urge people, if they have the opportunity, to come along to Public Gallery. Even if you haven't registered, there will be plenty of space. There is always plenty of space in the Public Gallery. There's no need to have registered. You can just come along. Probably best to bring some form of ID, not technically required, but it will speed the process up a great deal. You have to be willing to submit to a search, but please do come along if you are able to. I will be covering every minute of it, as I have been throughout. You can follow me at Tom B. Fowler on whatever social media platform you prefer, though I'm the most active on X, Twitter. You can also join the Spy Cops info group on Facebook that has lots of updates. The videos of the reaction videos will appear live. They'll also be there for posterity on the Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance YouTube channel. If you're able to share any of this stuff, please do so. Check out the hashtag Spy Cops. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for watching. Anything else anybody wants to add before we go? We're literally on 2.5 hours now. I think.
Thank you, Tom, for doing this great work. Thank you. It's amazing.
I've just spotted a question in the comments about the choice of CPs, and I think it's worth saying that this inquiry has been running for over a decade years. And the core participants were selected back in 2015 for the most part. And most of us were selected because at that point in 2015, we knew that we had had some kind of contact with undercover police. So we were able to argue that we should be core participants. So it's been quite random because we didn't have any of the information that we had now. We didn't even necessarily know all of the officers that we know about now. So there's a lot of people who didn't put in core participant applications in 2015 who didn't. So it's been quite random. Is the response on that, the selection of core participants. There have been a few late applications to become core participants, mostly from people with very strong reasons, like women who were deceived by some of the officers who have found out late that they were deceived, that the man that they had a relationship with was an undercover police officer. But in general, it's a slightly weird bunch of us. There's a very large group of core participants who were part of the 113 people arrested at Ratcliffe-on-Soar with Mark Kennedy, because they had been arrested on that day and they knew about it. But many of them were involved in other things over the years, and so have found that other stuff is coming out now from the inquiry that was not part of the reason why we applied in the first place.
So we're pointing out that that there's many witnesses who are not co-participants, and there are reasons for being co-participants in terms of opening and closing statements and stuff, but the way this inquiry is currently working and it's changing, co-participant status doesn't actually have the same significance as it does in other inquiries.
I think it's also just a little point, in all the kind of incredible convoluted procedural frustrations that we've been dealing with, you keep thinking, is this cock up or conspiracy? And it's very hard to work out, but Kate had a lovely line the other day. It's a conspiracy that they're cocking up spectacularly, and I think
that's a great line to finish on. Thanks everybody for joining us. Please check out spycops.info for more information. Check out the hashtag spycops for what the latest thing that's happening. Thanks you all for joining us, and we'll see you all on Monday morning, 10 a.m. for the live questioning of the undercover police officer HN14, cover name Jim Sutton,
Psycho Dream,
real name Jim Boyling,
Andrew James Boyling.
Yeah, see you all then. Bye for now.